And so Dr. Lauren Russell is an applied microeconomist with primary fields in labor economics, and public finance. Her research centers U.S. racial inequality with a focus on the criminal legal system. Her recent work documents the evolution of criminal backgrounds, checking the United States, and investigates how the increasing availability of criminal record information to employers start in the 1970s impacted the labor market outcomes of historically disadvantaged groups. Lauren recently graduated from the Harvard School with a Ph.D. in public policy, and she has earned a master's in economics from Duke University, as she also got a bachelor's in classics with a minor in economics from Harvard University. Starting this fall, Lauren will be an economist at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Please help me welcome Lauren Russell to the stage.
Thank you for that very wonderful introduction. And it is true, I do love Beyonce. All right, so good evening. As it was previously mentioned, my name is Lauren Russell, now Dr. Lauren Russell as of this past May. I still haven't gotten quite used to hearing that. But I am really, really honored to be able to speak with you all today, especially in light of all the amazing work that I've seen that the students have produced. So I thought it would be good to start by telling you a little bit about myself and why I'm here today. All right, so a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Southwest Atlanta, if you're familiar with the city. And I always like to start with the fact that I was born in Southwest Atlanta because I think it's actually something that's core to my research identity, right? So when I think about Atlanta, you know, it's one of the few majority Black cities that's left in the United States. And it's a place where I had the opportunity to grow up surrounded by Black educators and Black mentors, and a place where I really got to learn a lot about Black history. And I think this is something that has really helped form the types of research questions that I ask and the way that I approach research questions. So, for college, I left Atlanta and I attended Harvard University, where I studied classics and I did a minor in economics. But if someone would have told me then that I'd be studying economics as a part of my career, I never would have dreamed that that would be the case. After I left Harvard, I worked as a consultant for a large bank in Atlanta, a job that I thought would be a really good fit for me, but actually turned out to be a very bad fit for me. I was someone who was always very deeply concerned about inequality, particularly racial inequality in the United States, and I felt that none of the work that I was doing at the bank really engaged with that in any way. So like you all may be doing now, or to the students, I really started to wonder at that time, how could I make a career in actually doing something that was more aligned with my passions? And so it took me a while to figure it out, but eventually it led me to the conclusion that I should do a Ph.D., right? I decided that I wanted to do research, specifically a research in economics or public policy, because those were the tools that I wanted to use to study racial inequality. So I decided to further pursue economics. I went on to Duke University. I got a master's in economics. Then after I left there, I went back to Harvard, spent a lot of time in Cambridge to get a Ph.D. in economics focused public policy. And here I am now, fresh from my Ph.D. program. Starting this fall, as Kennedy mentioned, I'll be working as an economist in the Federal Reserve System. I'll be in the labor markets team studying U.S. labor markets, and I've also been tasked with also studying racial inequality in U.S. labor markets. So as the last item on this slide says, why am I here today? Well, I'm here today because, as you can tell from my research interests that Kennedy mentioned, I care a lot about inequality research, and I care even more about really mentoring and teaching the next cohort of inequality scholars. And so that's why I'm here today, because the students in this room, they are our next cohort of inequality scholars, and I'm really interested in the research that you all are going to give birth to. My hope is that you all will be leading the charge in the years to come in studying inequality as it relates to race, gender, socioeconomic background, et cetera. As you all know, right now we're at a very critical point in our country, right? And your research is very much needed in the moment, and it's also needed in the near future. We're at this crossroads in our national identity where we can head down one path where we address racial inequality and the causes of racial inequality, and we target equity-focused solutions. Or we can go another path, which some are trying to push, where we allow the past to be rewritten in a way where the origins of inequality are hidden so that the future will only benefit a chosen few. So I know that you all are aware of this, right? I know you all have seen the news either via TikTok, Apple News, Instagram, Facebook, whatever other types of media may be out there. And we know that in the current moment, what we're facing what I would consider attacks on the conscience of the country, right? So we're facing attacks that on race-conscious admissions, right? Also known as affirmative action, where in the midst of police departments being scrutinized for excessive force and the ways in which they target minority communities, we're in a time where we have rooms filled with mostly male politicians making decisions about women's private healthcare decisions. And we're also at a time when the court has allowed businesses to be able to refuse services to others based on their sexual orientation and gender identity, right? And on top of all of this, we now also have a major political push to rewrite the history of marginalized groups so that the future generations won't even protest that these things are happening, right? Some are trying to make it so that future generations don't even know about historic inequality and disadvantage. So, I see this as a very clear and direct, in-your-face attempt to limit our historic knowledge that's really essential to understanding why we are where we are today and how to move forward towards equity in the future. And so this is something that's been a very popular theme in my research, right? This focus on having accurate history. This is something that I see as essential to research, and it's been a critical component of my own research. So in my dissertation research, I asked the question, how did the rise of mass incarceration and criminal background checking after the civil rights movement impact the labor market outcomes of Black men? And the reason why I was able to ask this question is because when I grew up, I had learned about the ways in which Black employment was oppressed under Jim Crow. And I had also learned about how this new or a similar socio-political system emerged after the civil rights movement that also suppressed outcomes in a similar way, but now quote unquote for a criminal class of people. So now it's your turn to really engage in this research and ensure that the things that our communities face, the barriers that our community face are talked about and learned about. So at this time, your work, your voice, your dedication to your community is needed now more than ever. And I know that sounds like a very big charge, but I do want to add it's also perfectly okay if you don't know exactly how you will make the contribution that you like to make, right? In fact, I didn't know these things until well after college, and I'm still working on it now. But what I have for you today is I thought I would offer 3 pieces of advice that I've learned along my journey in my very short career. And so the 3 pieces of advice that I would like to talk to you all about today is 1, knowing yourself and the history of your community and why that's important to the research that you'll do. The second piece of advice I'd like to give you is viewing your identity as an asset, and an asset that's really needed in the research community. And the third piece of advice I'd like to give you is about how you form a village that will support and protect you as you go along the research journey, because it's not an easy thing to do. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time I have left today speaking a little bit about each piece of advice and the importance of it and how I've managed to do it or kind of do it. So the first piece of advice is that you really need to know the history of both your community and the history of other marginalized groups, right? And when I say that you need to know your history, I mean that you need to know it well enough to be able to teach others about it, right? That's a different level of knowing things. So as I mentioned earlier, we're at a time now where we have some political leaders pushing an agenda to limit your access and younger students' access to learning about the origins of inequality in the United States, right? And the best tool that you have at your hands right now to combat that is to read, right? And so this is my slide of a few select books that I love to read. And when I say that you need to read, I mean that you need to read often, and you need to read across academic disciplines, and you need to read works from various sources, right? You need books, you need news, you need, I don't know what you call TikTok, but you read that too, right? You need all of it, right? At this point in your journey, you should really be considering yourself as a sponge, where your job is to soak up every bit of knowledge that you can, right? And for me, this is what I would consider the first step in being able to identify the challenges that our communities have faced historically and are still facing in the current time. And this is the foundation that you'll have for thinking about solutions and a path forward. So I do want to emphasize here from my lovely collection of books that your gathering of knowledge should also never be narrowly focused, or it shouldn't be one-dimensional, right? You should read works from various disciplines because it trains your mind to consider social issues from different perspectives. And this is something that's incredibly important in being able to do research. I'm an economist. I come from a classics background as well, though. But I also intentionally make sure to read and cite work from African American studies, from sociology, from history, from literature, right? And this has also helped me be able to shape the types of research questions that I ask. So I also want to do a plug, and maybe it's because I'm a really big reader and I'm into fiction, but into fiction. I also want to talk a little bit about why you should also add fiction to the list of books that you read. So while you're in this process of reading and learning and soaking up everything that you can in order to build your knowledge base, right, it's also really important to be able to communicate that knowledge to others. And so for this reason, I do urge you to read a little bit of fiction. Oftentimes in the social sciences, we focus on the importance of knowing facts, right, and being able to list off facts. But it's also really important to know how to tell a narrative using those facts, right? And this is something that reading fiction will teach you. It teaches you how to craft a strong narrative around research questions that will allow others across discipline to be able to engage with your work. So that's my short plug on why you should read fiction. Hopefully you take the suggestion. So my second piece of advice is about viewing your identity as an asset, and not just seeing it as a positive thing and something that contributes to your research question, but the fact that your identity and the perspective that you had is needed in the research community, right? It's needed beyond yourself. It's needed for the greater good. And so, you have a unique viewpoint and perspective that's incredibly valued. The type of questions that you ask and the way in which you are able to ask those questions is because of your perspective and experiences, and someone who doesn't have those perspectives or experiences won't be able to ask those questions, and they definitely won't be able to ask the questions with the depth that you'd be able to ask the question. So I thought I would demonstrate this with an example from my own life. So I am from Atlanta, Georgia, Southwest Atlanta, because that's important, and this is a map of Fulton County in Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up. So what this map presents is it presents measures of economic mobility across many neighborhoods, or what the technical term is, the census tracts across Fulton County. And so what it shows more specifically is the income that a child growing up in each of these neighborhoods has at the age of 35. And it looks at children who grew up 1980 to 1984, I believe. So when looking at this map, how you interpret this is children who grew up in blue neighborhoods went on to have higher outcomes in adulthood, and children who grew up in red and orange neighborhoods had lower outcomes in adulthood, with adulthood being age 35. And if we look at this map, we see that there's a clear geographic difference in these outcomes, right? If I were to show you a side-by-side map of the racial composition of Fulton County, it would almost match one for one the map that we're looking at now, right? You would see that the northern part of the county during this time period when these children grew up was majority white, and you would see that the southern part of the county was majority black. Now, some people would look at this map and they would just conclude that, outcomes seem to be differing by the racial composition of neighborhoods, And it must be something about those neighborhoods. There must be something bad about those neighborhoods. Or there's something that's happening in those neighborhoods where they can't produce good outcomes for the people who grow up there. However, having had the experience of growing up in Atlanta, right, in one of these orange or red neighborhoods on the southwest side, I know that what I'm seeing is a map in the resources that are provided to places on the northern part of the county versus the southern part of the county. Right? Growing up where I have grown up has allowed me to have a different perspective than that of a lot of my peers in college and graduate classes. And so when I look at this map, I see something entirely different. Specifically, I look at stark differences in the financial resources provided to schools, even schools that are within the same county. Right? And this is something that I also witnessed growing up in high school when I had the opportunity to just see one of the schools on the northern side of the county and saw the textbooks and saw the computer labs and saw the campus and saw what their cafeterias were like. We had amazing teachers, but they had a whole nother level of financial resources that we weren't allowed to access. And so, while my research itself does not focus on education at all, I'm willing to bet a sizable amount of money that my experience growing up in my neighborhood would also allow me to ask a different research question when I see this map than others who did not grow up where I grew up. And I just want to emphasize that these types of research questions and having that type of personal experience when you look at data like this is incredibly valuable, and it's that type of perspective that allows us to push forward towards an equity agenda, right? So my third and final piece of advice that I'd like to leave you all with today is the importance of building a support system of people that are invested in you and invested in your success. These are the people that you will call your village. So when it comes to building your village, there are 3 types of people that I want you to make sure to include. You want to have peers, you want to have mentors, and you also want to have mentees. First, let's talk about mentors. So mentors are the people that you go to for advice. They're the people who have been in your shoes before. Examples of these people include teachers, professors, older students, parents, trusted advisors, right? And I cannot emphasize the importance enough of having these types of people guide you along your journey. Throughout my academic and research career, I've had many, many mentors, people that I could talk to while I was struggling with my research or just flat out didn't even know what to do. There have definitely been some times where I've been so confused about what to do that I couldn't even articulate it as a question. And it was my mentors, they're the people who stepped in and helped me push through this, right? These are the people that encouraged me to keep going even when my projects failed. And even more importantly, these are the people who taught me how to do research, because you don't just pop out knowing how to do it. All right. So the second type of person that you really need to have in your village is peers also. So these are the people who are in the same position as you and probably understand best what you're going through at the current moment. And when it comes to peers, you should always do your best to strive to have a collaborative mindset when interacting with your peers. You want to ask them for feedback on your work or your research ideas, and you want to give them helpful feedback on theirs. And this is what I consider this symbiotic relationship between peers is also a core part of producing quality scholarship. I can't tell you the number of times when I've presented projects to people in my cohort, to other PhD students in other schools, even friends at home who aren't in PhDs in public policy or economics as well, and the times that I've also contributed back to them and given them feedback that have helped them grow their works. And I want to say that I know that that's something it's a very vulnerable type of experience to have, right? When you open yourself up to your peers and you say, what do you think about this research idea? What do you think about the way that I approach it? And it doesn't always feel comfortable, but I do want to emphasize that it's one of the main pathways through which your research will grow. And finally, we have your mentors and we have your peers in your village. You always want to make sure that you include mentees in your village as well. So at every step in your research journey, you're always going to learn something, right? And you should make it your mission to always share out what you learn at each step in the way, right? Share it with the next person, share it with the next cohort of scholars. And this is also something that's just as important as receiving mentorship and collaborating with your peers. I think about this as kind of like a strength in numbers kind of thing, right? The research questions that you ask and the solutions that you propose are made better and they're made more viable when you have a large community that shares in your goal of moving us toward equity or reducing inequality. You know, the more people that we have on that team, the more our voices are amplified, and this is how progress is enacted. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, I care a lot about studying inequality, but I care even more about helping the next cohort of scholars who will also go on to study inequality. And I see this as an important step in, important and essential, because essential is different than important. It's an essential step in diversifying the voices that we hear in research spaces and policy. This is also important because the perspectives that are in the room when policies are being made are the perspectives that are going to be prioritized with whatever solution is going to come, you know, whatever solution is going to arise from that room. And I'm here today because I want to make sure that you all's voices are in the room. And so I'm willing to offer whatever mentoring, advice that I can. And I also want you all to do your part and make sure that the next group of students, the group of younger students beneath you, their voices are also in the room too. So for the sake of time, I will conclude with my advice there. And I hope that these 3 pieces of advice, while I went through them very quickly, are helpful in helping you further your journey. As I said earlier, you know, I'm looking at the next cohort of inequality scholars, and I'm really excited to witness all the things that you'll go on to produce, the things that you've already produced. I got a chance to see about a couple, you know, like 5 or 6 posters, and I was incredibly impressed. So I'm excited to be able to do a tour around the hallways and see all of it. You guys are already in the game. And so just excited to see what you all will accomplish. Thank you.